Why are people in the West so discontent these days? Perhaps it is due to technology causing echo chambers and radicalization within those chambers. Perhaps it is the gender roles and the tug of war over who performs what and gender politics. Or maybe it is globalism and the huge migrational waves setting the world on fire. Or perhaps it is the corruption of virtues and values that are cracking the foundation in what the West was founded on. And maybe it is the fact that subjectivity has long replaced objectivity. Or maybe it is the capitalist class hoarding wealth around themselves and causing inequality. I have read thousands of books, from psychology to philosophy to history, just about anything you can imagine really, and I always found this topic to be really interesting. So today I'm going to give my answer to what the obvious problem is. And I will do it with the help of some of the books I've read. One of them is, of course, Aristotle. It is a well-known book, but in here is actually a very good answer to one of the problems going on in the West right now. But let's get this show on the road. Chapter 1: Virtues and Vices. Aristotle believed that virtues could become vices if they were done in either excess or in deficiency. The excess of generosity could be wastefulness, the excess of courage could be rashness, and even freedom had its own state of excess. Now, it is important to remember that even Aristotle believed that freedom could become a vice. And what does he say about freedom? Well, if Aristotle stood among us today and we asked him, what is the excess vice of freedom? He would likely answer in the language of virtue ethics. For him, every virtue lies between two vices, one of excess and one of deficiency. So what would he say was the deficiency of freedom? Well, it will be oppression where one lacks the power to act, speak, or choose freely. But on the counter, or the flip side, what would be the excess of freedom? Too much freedom? Well, it will be anarchy, freedom unbound from virtue, reason, responsibility, or the common good. Excessive freedom becomes disorder, a life led by impulse rather than virtue, where desire rules instead of reason. He might phrase it something like this: freedom without measure becomes license. The unchecked pursuit of one's will dissolves into chaos, for virtue must guide liberty as the rudder guides the ship. To Aristotle, freedom is not merely the ability to do whatever one wishes. It is the ability to choose rightly under reason, in harmony with community and one's own flourishing. Excess freedom becomes disorder, a life led by impulse rather than virtue, where desire rules instead of reason. So now we know that in Aristotle's view, even something like freedom could become a vice if done in excess. Now I have one question to ask you. Do you believe that in the West that we have an excess of freedom because we have been scared of the deficiency of freedom we saw in other countries, like dictatorships, where there was oppression and a lot of other things going on? Because in Aristotle's view, even freedom, when taken to the extreme, becomes either anarchy or a vice. I will leave you with that question. Think long and hard about it. Can freedom become a vice if done in excess? Part 2: Positive freedom versus negative freedom. One of the most important contributions to modern political thought came from the British philosopher Sir Isaiah Berlin in his paper two concepts of liberty, given at Oxford. In it he states that there's negative liberty, which is freedom from interference, and there's positive liberty, freedom to act, self-direct, and pursue aims. I will here go with negative freedom. Negative freedom is the freedom from interference, the absence of external constraints, and the emphasis on a lack of barriers and non-interference. You all probably already know this from different areas of your life. For example, the freedom to speak without censorship is a negative freedom. The freedom to own property is a negative freedom. The freedom to practice religion is a negative freedom. And there's so many more, including the freedom to movement. And the list goes on and on. Then you have positive freedom. Freedom is when you are free to achieve an act. And you are free when you have the ability, means, or opportunity to fulfill your potential. It emphasizes empowerment, resources, and internal capacity, not just lack of barriers. For example, a mountain can be very hard to climb if there's no road up there. And a child can have a very hard time reaching something without the support of others. Positive freedom is, in other words, whenever nothing is keeping you from doing something, but you simply don't have the means or the ability to act on the freedom in and of itself. In short, you might have the ability to go to a grocery store, you just don't have any money to pay for at the grocery store. You might have a boat, but no sail. And all those areas are bad situations to be in. Now, what do I want you to remember from all this? Well, I want you to remember that freedom has both positive and negative qualities. You have positive freedom and you have negative freedom. Positive freedom is your ability to do something. Negative freedom is someone else's freedom to not be subject to what you're doing. So, in other words, if you allow people to play loud music after 10 p.m. at night, you're giving them a freedom. But at the same time, you're also taking away someone else's freedom to sleep soundly at 10 p.m. at night, because now there'll be loud music from that other person practicing the freedom. So you see, freedom often conflicts. You have the positive aspect of it, you have the negative aspect of it, and you all know this, like there's a reason we take away the freedom to commit certain felonies, because we don't want that freedom of one person to hinder the freedom of a lot of other people. So this is nothing new, but I think it is very new for people to think in that kind of way. Another thing I want you to think about is the fact that freedom is not the only virtue that exists. After all, if freedom is the main virtue, what about good? Like, how does good rank compared to freedom? Is good above freedom? What about justice? Is justice higher or lower than freedom? What about love? Is love lower or higher than freedom? You see, what you eventually will be led back to is good, because all the other values depend on what we consider good. So in that way, freedom is not the highest value. Good is our perception of good, and what we believe to be good is the highest value. Because all the other values, something like justice, for example, leads back to us asking ourselves, what do we believe to be a good outcome? And that is what we call justice. We call things justice when we achieve a good outcome, when we achieve a wanted outcome that we like to see. So in other words, freedom cannot be the only value, because freedom is in interplay with other values, and these values often reach in and intermingle with the concept of freedom. They can either make freedom more important, or they can make freedom less important. But what I really want to teach you here is that freedom is a part of many other values, many other virtues. And if you say that freedom is the highest virtue, or the highest value, then you're also kind of saying that some other values or some other virtues are less. Like, for example, how would you rank truth compared to freedom? And I think people in the West don't really ask this, because freedom has become a really good mantra. It is something you can say and everybody just agrees. But really, is freedom the highest value? That is what I'm really making you ask, make you question about. But those were the two things I wanted you to take away from the first part of the video. There's something called positive freedom, there's something called negative freedom. There's many ways to formulate which is which. I showed you one Isaiah Berlin did. I have given you my own definition of it also in this part. But what I really want you to take away is freedom is not just freedom. And I think for a long time in the West, we have pushed that discussion away. We have not been ready to take that discussion, that other values exist that are just as important as freedom. And even freedom itself is a lot more complex than what we make it out to be. We often use the word as placing something on a pedestal, and it becomes untouchable. But we really need to be careful in our society today what we believe in, because we see the consequences of our belief systems everywhere, and we really have to ask ourselves if we are enlightened enough and aware enough of what we're doing. And that is why I gave the example of how these values were seen in Aristotle's time in ancient Greece, and gave you that perspective. But let's continue here. We have another section of the video. Another thing I'll mention here about freedom is that freedom tends to lead to everything being subjective, because you kind of have to agree that everyone is just doing their own thing. If everybody is free, a moral relativism often takes hold, where truth and virtue simply become subjective, because everybody believes their own thing, everybody has their faith in their own thing. And this can be an issue, because it erodes many different parts of society and social cohesion. And it also erodes what values, what policies, and many other things that society can agree on. In short, if there's a lot of freedom and a lot of divergent thinking, what you'll often have happen is society starts splitting up into different cliques, into different bubbles. And these bubbles start interfighting each other over the right subjective value that should rule in society. And of course, absolutely freedom can also be tough for humans to deal with, because we have no inherent meaning if everything is just everything. And when that happens, you often see us numbing our feelings with consumerism and all kinds of Decadence because we have no purpose, we have nothing to sacrifice for, we have no meaning except that existentialist meaning only the strongest can create for themselves. And another issue is the declining social trust as people grow more unequal, as people don't believe the same things, as everything starts diverging in society. You really see a lot of different paths, and those paths often conflict. Now we have already gone over the first thing, freedom, so let's go over the second thing that is often a big issue in the West, and that is the gender wars, the cultural identity, all the trench warfare going on between the genders, which is putting a real strain on both the state and the culture of the West. In the West, we're seeing a breakdown in the harmony of society between genders. We're seeing a breakdown of traditional family structures with no one knowing how to behave or who does what. We're seeing failing birth rates due to career before family incentives, and that will really lead to bankrupt society in the future, because we really need birth rates to stay around 2.1 to replace the current population, or at least 1.8 to not fall as fast as they're currently doing, to have a functional society and someone to care for the elderly. But there's many other reasons, one being the rise in loneliness for both men and women, the decline in happiness we have seen since the 70s, when you ask, for example, women. And you also have boys underperforming in education, and a lot of masculine values being very villainized. And I think that is a very unhealthy thing, because a society also needs masculine values, like courage, like honesty, like leadership. There's so many good masculine values, and I feel like as a society we have given up on instilling these masculine values in the youth, and because of that the youth is much poorer than they would have been otherwise. Just something like discipline and all these other things that a real masculine ideal can teach you are great things for children to learn, and also to trust in one's own ability, and this kind of sense of honor and this kind of sense of pride that can be in masculine ideals. I really think a lot of children like these days, including these communities to belong in. So what I'm really seeing is, with the breakdown of masculine ideals, what is really happening to young boys is they become kind of driftless. They become kind of outsiders to society. They don't participate as much in society. And that is really a shame, because society needs all its people to function well and to contribute to society. So there's a lot of negative ways these gender wars are impacting society. Another way is the fact that it also prevents many types of discussion. So, because right now there's a stereotypical image that kind of exists. For example, there's in many nations thousands upon thousands of men that are victims of domestic abuse, but you never hear about those. And you never hear about crime rates going up among women, something like stealing, something like a lot of these things. So what I'm really fearing right now is we're doing the same mistake we did with making a patriarchy. We're just doing a matriarchy this time. But what it really shows is that we have learned nothing about how to organize a society or how to include everyone in a society. And I think that is a real shame. And I think that the conflict is really going to split the West down the middle. And it will become a real issue that will really ruin multiple generations at this point. Now, let me make one thing perfectly clear. I'm neither on the side of feminism or on the side of male chauvinism. I believe that the genders should realize one simple truth, that the genders are born into an existence where they're meant to work together, in a symbiosis, in a symbiotic relationship. And in any symbiotic relationship, it is give and take. If both sides try to take, well, then it's not a symbiotic relationship anymore. It is something known as predation. And predation never leads to long-term relationships or even happiness for that sake. So I think instead of the genders always being at each other's neck, the genders need to have a real discussion about how they can be useful for each other, and also have a real discussion about values and the interdynamics between the genders. Right now, you see what we call in psychology is something happens where both sides form this enemy picture. And first, to make an enemy, you have to identify them with certain character traits. You have to tie certain bad character traits to them, and then you have to make them seem as least a human being as possible. You sort of create the other side into a monster, and then you can blame all the bad on the monster. And then when what you say or what you yourself do is perceived as righteous. And that is what the genders are doing right now. They're in this trench warfare, they're painting enemy pictures of each other, they're identifying all the bad traits and painting them on the other gender. And then they're doing this kind of stereotyping you always see. You'll notice humans will always first do a prototype of something they believe is very bad, and then they'll try to paint it on you with different stereotypes. And that is how we go to war. Like, to make an enemy, we first have to alienate them, we have to believe them less than we are. And that is what the genders are doing right now. They are alienating or alienating each other. And that is why we are in trench warfare right now between genders. So it will be a huge step for the genders if they could step out of this predation mentality where they try to always succeed on the expense of the other gender, and go towards a more symbiotic relationship where one looks to supplement the other strengths and to also make up for each other's weaknesses. And maybe if one is really good at having a symbiotic relationship, maybe even an altruistic relationship is possible, where both are doing good constantly without taking much. I think that is the way forward for gender roles in our society. I think we really need to get out of the trench warfare, and I think we need to admit that we need each other, and also to have a real honest discussion about gender roles in society. And I feel like that is something people in the West aren't ready to do yet. And one also has to remember a lot of these political organizations that are pushing the narratives are often organizations that rely on that narrative to be very successful, to get funding. And that is why they often make that narrative probably a little more stereotypical than it should be. So that is something to keep an eye out for. All these people pushing you towards hate, towards discrimination, towards these things. They often have a motive themselves. And trust me when I say you won't be happy that you won't be happy yourself just because someone else is miserable. That has never been how the world works, and I hope people will eventually grow into enough greatness of character to realize that it also benefits themselves to do good in the world. So yeah, that was it for now. Let's continue with the other topics. The next one is foreign migration. The issue with foreign migration is it is another stress factor for the West that leads to cultural dilution and loss of national identity. It leads to parallel societies forming instead of integration. It can also lead to crime spikes and a lot of other things in the more poorly integrated groups there are. And of course, the welfare state and a lot of welfare programs become more stressed and more taxed as more people come that need them. So these programs are under a lot of stress currently, and the outside border of the West is under a lot of pressure from migration. And the issue with migration into the West is it often doesn't lead to other people adopting Western culture. It often leads to parallel societies and crime rates going up in those parallel societies, which causes a lot of issues in the social glue of society and leads to a lot of disruption and a lot of chaos in society. The West hasn't been that successful at integrating people, at least not from outside the Western world. And it is something the West has to really notice and really take serious. Maybe we need to limit migration as much as possible until we find a way where we can more successfully integrate people, both for their sake and for our sake. Now there is one final F I want to include, and that is the fourth F, and that is finance. The West is under a lot of pressure right now because of financial speculation. That a lot of capital moves from long-term investment to short-term gain. And you can see that in the housing market. A lot of housing that are meant to be home for people have now become financial products and a way for these investors to speculate. And that is driving up prices like crazy to the point that people can't afford to live anymore. We have had a real explosion in home prices. And another thing is that because savings and wages are decoupled from this asset growth, people often feel like their salaries and everything else can't keep up with these assets. And so they feel like they fall behind while these speculators accumulate wealth. And you never want an economy where someone pushing a button on a screen can make more money than someone that's been in the field all day doing hard work for 12 hours while pushing the button took a few minutes, right? But that is the reality we live in. We live in the reality where a lot of speculators are simply making a lot of fictive money out of thin air, and that fictive money starts chasing goods. And then we're at the second problem I'll go over now. And that second problem is inflation. As all these speculators print money and gain all these fictional values, those fictional values starts chasing real values like food, like it can be oil, it can be diamonds, it can be anything real in the world. All these fictive computer numbers, ones and zeros, they are manipulated to create their wealth. Those ones and zeros now start chasing real objects in the real world, like food, like cars, like homes, and all these different types of things. And the issue is, it makes inflation go absolutely crazy, along with the government printing more money, because they have found out that that is an easy way to take money from people without taxing them. In other words, reducing the purchasing parity. And that is why a lot of Westerners are screaming right now, because yes, they make more money, but they don't have more purchasing power. The purchasing power is only going one way, and that is down in a dark hole, really. And that is a real issue. Inflation is a real issue for many, many people. And it is because of this unhealthy economy based on speculation. This is an issue because people start taking on more debt, and debt is exactly what they want to create a lot of loyal workers, a lot of slave bees. And the next thing is, this makes people postpone children, another really bad thing for society. But you can't blame people. All the things they need to buy are increasing faster in price than the wages. And then people are being told that they have to be grateful for their wages, because they're a lot higher now. But the truth is, the number doesn't matter. What matters is what you can get for the number. And what you can get in food, in homes, in cars, and everything else has gone down drastically. And even more, this also encourages an unhealthy economy, because if you save, your money loses value to inflation. So it encourages people to spend and spend and spend and spend. That is both bad for the environment, but it is exactly what these companies want. They want people to spend, 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 go into debt, become loyal workers, and the state loves to see GDP growth, even if that GDP growth is something meaningless. And yeah, that is the situation we're in now. Speculation has turned the economy unhealthy. But there's something worse going on. Monopoly is taking hold. A lot of these companies are taking over the world. And a lot of these big capital chains now own everything. They own all the 30 companies you think you have a choice between, and they just hide behind a mother company that makes all these different named companies, so you think when you go grocery shopping that you have a real choice. But if you follow the tentacles or the spider web back to where they come from, you realize it is the same companies owning everything. I once heard in the West that 4 companies own most of the food supply. Think about that when you think, why is food expensive in the West? That is probably a good reason, right? But the issue is, these companies, after they've had their monopolies, after they have had more income growth, more value growth than anyone has ever seen in human history, the problem is they're not happy with that. They use those money bills, they use that gold to really buy political power. They start corrupting politics, they start lobbying, they start buying out politicians, they start changing laws to benefit themselves. You better bet what benefits them is not always what benefits you. And that is the situation we're in right now, where the common folk is pretty much being let down by all parts of society. The middle class is disappearing, it is being wiped out. Soon you will only have the ultra rich and the ultra poor. The middle is going to get wiped out. And that is the sad reality right now. living in the West. And this is the conclusion one will quickly come to. Now, there's one last thing I want to touch briefly upon, and that is the role of technology in society, because technology is also putting the West under a lot of stress today. Now, there's many issues with technology in the West today. One issue is that attention becomes commodified, that platforms harvest your focus, and that relationships turn shallow through all these very, very superficial dating apps and superficial social medias. Another thing is that identity moves online, but sadly it moves online in a way that it often allows echo chambers to form, where people sit in their own bubble full of this confirmation bias, and they just confirm each other, and it leads to this radicalization of society across the West. And then you also have to remember a lot of these algorithms reward outrage, they reward disgust, they reward all things that can kind of provoke an emotion, really. And those are not always the things that we want to be feeding our brains with, that we want to be constantly engaged with. It is maybe not something that makes us feel at peace, or something that makes us happy. Another thing is that as we allow technology to get us hooked on convenience, we also fall victims to a lot of these subscriptions and to a lot of these technologies these technology companies promise us. And with that comes a lot of giving up our privacy, our rights, and a lot of other things. And there's many other consequences. You cannot be as anonymous as in today's world as you could be in the past. Everything is online these days. Everything is documented. But the real issue is how technology is radicalizing people in the West, how it makes them into attention zombies, how it harvests the focus, the life energy, turning them essentially into batteries to make money from. And also the fact that they always get you hooked with convenience. And convenience is how they take away your privacy. It is how they take away your independence. It is how they sell you stuff. And nowadays, a lot of things will be subscription services. And it won't end there. Soon your TV will have a subscription service of 200 channels. Then your fridge will have one. Then your car will have one. Before you know it, just going outside the door to breathe free fresh air, that will be a subscription service too. So really, we have to be careful in the West that we don't fall prey to this late stage capitalism, this hyper capitalism, and that is really where we are today. That we are becoming the product in everything. We are becoming surveyed in everything. We are essentially losing all of that freedom we care so much about. And I don't necessarily think we are losing that freedom to people with good intentions at heart. I really don't. But yeah, remember, where your focus goes, there your energy flows. If they control your focus, they also control what you do in a day. And if they steal that focus to promote their own commercials, to promote their own ways of making money, then you're not growing, then you're not working on yourself, then you're not becoming, then you're not making money. And really, that's a shame. Technology is a double-edged sword in the West, and it is putting the West under a lot of stress. My final conclusion is this. What the West really needs these days is more balance. You see it everywhere. You see it from the over-prioritization of something like freedom, causing other values to collapse. You see it in something like gender roles, where these trench warfares are taking place. And of course, all these things are bad for society. If the genders are fighting, no children are being born. Without children, there's no one to take care of you when you get elderly, and there's no one to take care of society. So without children, society simply collapses. And there's no one that benefits from the collapse of society. And of course, if you believe freedom to be the most important value, then you're likely to not value something like justice, fairness, goodness, and a lot of other values as much. I'm not saying that freedom is not a value we should protect, and that freedom is not a value we should take care of. Freedom is very important. Just ask all the people out in the world that are oppressed today. So, historically, humans have not been free. We know that from all the slave trades and other things that have happened historically in the history of this world. But we also have to be really careful to remember to practice other values, and to not just get into this mindset of I subjectively want this, therefore this is the entire truth, therefore I'm going to go after this at the expense of everyone else. You see, it is this corruption of values that often predates, or you always see it when civilizations are about to fall, because it is the great people that built the civilization. Take the Romans. You had 5 good emperors. You have, most of them were stoicists. Most of them were what Plato would have called philosopher kings. People who tried to do good, instill good values, and pass that on. But then you had 5 terrible Roman emperors. They were brutal, they were ruthless, they had none of the values or the virtues of the other emperors. And it was when those virtues collapsed that you saw greed, you saw corruption, you saw all these things starting to undermine society. And what does society then respond with? It responds with bureaucracy. It responds with more law. It responds with more police. It responds with all these things, because when you can't trust people, then the only way is to make a lot of laws. But what happens then is that fairness and justice is often choked, because paper simply doesn't lead to fairness or justice. It simply doesn't. You could have 2,000 more lawyers. It wouldn't guarantee justice. It kind of goes back to what the philosopher, or you could also call him a lawyer, in ancient times, what Cicero said. Cicero had this quote, and he said, "The more laws, the less justice. The more laws, the less justice." And I sometimes think there's a truth to that. The more we try to make this bureaucracy, the more the bureaucracy takes on a life of its own, and the more we are not longer in control of society. We lose control of society, and then you have all these weird things starting to happen that are inherently very unfair. It can be ordinary people that are getting squashed by these simple laws that were never meant to target them, but suddenly they do, and they get put in prison for a really long time, or get really high fines for just being in the wrong place at the wrong time, really. Or you could have something where someone is acting on and what they feel to be just and what they feel to be good, and what they do might even be good and just in society, but where the laws have simply gotten so strict that suddenly what they're doing is wrong. Suddenly they're not allowed to do that, and they themselves get put in the same prison as the criminals. The irony is sometimes they get longer prison sentences than the criminals. And that is what I'm coming back to here. That is what really goes on in a civilization before it falls. You saw that in the Roman Empire. You saw that they began clipping coins, just like we're beginning to print money now. You saw that bureaucracy took on a life of its own. You saw wars happening on the outside of the Roman Empire that began collapsing it, began expanding its resources. And you saw all these leaders just living in a complete opposite reality from what was going on. And when one looks past history, and I have read so much history you wouldn't believe, and when I look at what is going on today, I, like many people, have the same observation that we're in a time period where we should be very careful not to end up like the Romans. Now, I do have some good news. Western civilization has been very close to collapsing many times, but every time Western civilization came close to collapse, 80 to 90% of the time, there's been people there to reverse the course, to save the West. It was the same in Roman times. Rome was close to collapsing 3 times before it really collapsed. It could have collapsed many hundreds of years before it did. But there was a few good generals and a few other people that decided that this shouldn't be the collapse of Rome, and they took matters into their own hands. And so this is to say that if you feel powerless to change something in the world today, just remember that Rome didn't collapse the first many times that Rome was meant to collapse. It first collapsed when people had given up trying to fix it. And that is a very dangerous situation with the apathy going on in the world today, because most people are put in a situation where they don't believe they can fix anything, where they believe they can't make a change. And that is just what I want to say to you is, it doesn't matter how big an organization is, it is still one person making a change. It doesn't matter how big a country is, it is still one person making a change. You see it all the time. When countries send people abroad, they send often just one leader abroad. One person making one big change. So I believe there's a lot of things putting pressure on the West right now. You also have migration. And migration is something the West has been quite bad at handling. Now, you should always look to do maximum good, and there's never anything wrong with helping people. But you also have to remember that when strangers come to your house, they also have to behave politely and try to learn the ways there. And I think the West has failed a lot with integration. I think the West in many ways should admit that it simply can't integrate many different cultures as it stands currently, because there's too big of a cultural divide. That is not to say that there won't be exceptions, because there always are. That is simply to say that in general, the West has been very bad at integrating people. That has not come from somewhere that is very close in mentality to the West. So there's nothing wrong with generosity, there's nothing wrong with being kind. But one also has to remember that there's something called reciprocity. And if I invite you kindly to my home, I give you food, and I do all these things, be a nice host and all these things, I also kind of expect people to not jump on the table, to not move furniture about, to not do all these different kind of disruptive behavior. And I think that the West is very well within its rights to ask certain counter demands of the people migrating into the West. And I think they should be given a chance, but I also think that there should be a counter reciprocity, a counter, I wouldn't say a counter demand, but a counter cost to immigrating into the West. I believe that the West, if it can't handle migration, then the West will simply have to do assimilation. It will simply have to say that it is only Western culture here, and that's that. But I hope it doesn't have to be that way. But if the West doesn't get a handle on immigration, it might have to be that way. But yeah. And finally, with finance, I believe that sadly we have gotten to a point where wealth inequality in the West is at the same point as it were in feudal Europe, where we had kings. I even believe it is worse now, because kings back in the day could only own so much. Companies these days can own much more with globalization. They can go to every corner of the world. That was something Adam Smith never knew about when he wrote his philosophy, or when he did his economic theories. He was seeing capitalism as the carpenter of one town competing against the carpenter of another town. It never occurred to him that through globalism and many other things, some companies could simply grow so big that there were no people in another town. They had conquered the whole market. They're in monopoly now. And the issue with these companies, when they get so much money, is money doesn't matter anything to them anymore. What they start buying instead with that money is political power. And from there, they start buying out political power and gradually corrupting the leadership, corrupting the laws of the country. To be very generous to that company. And that is something we're seeing right now. We are seeing companies get so big that they can barely fail. And sadly, we're also seeing that wages aren't keeping up, that these companies can manipulate supply and demand. So what you're really looking at is close to what I would call late-stage capitalism. We're getting to a point where the system is getting so unfair that it can barely keep together at the seams. And I am really excited to see if capitalism will survive another 20 to 30 years. The reason I say that is capitalism requires growth, but the planet is essentially a boat. The planet is a boat, and on this boat or on this island, we have the same amount of resources we always have had. We have the same amount of space we have always had. So there is an upper limit to how much you can grow. Just like some of you probably know this, if you have a small apartment or something like that, there's also a limit to how much furniture or how nice you can make it, or how clever you can make the interior decorating and use the space. It is the same with planet Earth. Planet Earth has an upper limit for the growth on it. And that growth is coming to a standstill. And that is bad news for capitalism, because the capitalistic system depends on growth. And for a long time, growth hasn't been happening that much in the West. So a lot of these companies have been going to Asia and across the world to developing countries and kind of exploiting the low-cost workforce. And I guess you can say they sometimes do something good by pulling people out of poverty, but it usually also comes with another side of the medallion, right? Hard work, and many people are really living in poverty while doing that hard work, and they often can't deny the work. And that is what goes back to what we talked about before: negative and positive freedom. For example, if you're hungry, you of course have the negative freedom to always go to the grocery store and try to buy food. But if you don't have money on you, then you really don't have the positive freedom to go and buy food at the grocery store, because you have nothing to pay for that food with. The same with work. Of course, you can enjoy your freedom. You always have that negative freedom. You can be yourself and enjoy freedom. But the fact of the matter is, people need a place to live, they need food, and they need all these other things. And to have those things, they need money. And without money, they don't have any positive freedom. So what is work really when it comes down to it? Well, people have to work. People have to have money. And yeah. So I'm really excited to see how capitalism is doing. It is for certain ruining a lot of the planet's environment right now. But I feel like also it is the cause of many of the conflicts in the West, and I feel like we haven't found the ideal economic system yet, and that'll probably surprise many of you. Now, often when you hear people that are liberals or people that are socialists, you'll often find that their discussions all come back to positive and negative freedom. Negative freedom is what the liberals want. They want the state to stay away. They want low taxes. They want to just be left alone in perfect freedom, in perfect negative freedom. Then you have something like the socialists. The socialists wants a lot of positive freedom. They want universal healthcare. They want universal education. They want a lot of these things to enable opportunities for those who don't really have any. And that is what you will find, that these two ideologies always conflict over. They conflict over each concept of freedom. And they have not found a way to balance that freedom yet in a meaningful way. And that is why we still have these conflicts 200 years after. And to be honest with you, I think it's time humanity found a new ideology. I'm getting tired of these old ideologies always fighting. And let's face it, they're both flawed. They're both flawed. They simply are. They are flawed. In one way or the other, they are flawed. They are two sides of the same coin. But a lot of these things I'm talking about here, I'll go more in depth in another video. This is just to say that the issue with the West right now is there's so many external conflicts, so many stressors, so much cultural change. And these are all happening at a time where the West is having a hard time finding the balance to deal with it all. And the West really needs to get back to its roots, to start prioritizing correctly. And we need new answers, and we need new people to wake up and change the systems. And that is how it will always be. I think for the last 20 or 30 years of my life, I have seen people believing all these theories will work, but they have all failed from one side of the other, because what a lot of these theories don't account for is human nature. And I think that is why capitalism has been so successful, because it accounted for human nature. Sadly, it also kind of aggravated the bad sides of human nature, the greed, the exploitation, all these things. So I certainly think that humanity can do better than capitalism. But it is also always the question of what humanity is ready for. And I think right now humanity is in an interim period. We're in a transition period. A lot of people will say that humanity is wise, that humanity is clever right now. I don't agree. I simply don't agree. Humanity is still like children growing up. And the most important thing we can do in this transition phase is simply to not drop the ball, simply to make safe, rational choices. So the people down the line that has more opportunities, has more wisdom than we have, can make the better choices. And that is where we are finding ourselves right now. When you're young, you don't want to mess up for life. And humanity right now is in its youth. Take care out there, guys.